All right, this time I'm going to show you guys how I do LEDs. You're going to need string and scissors. I will be using 3 different colors of bead, plus these faceted beads. You're going to need chopsticks or something similar, and you're going to need to use a light of some sort. I use fairy lights and I work with 10-foot strips. If you're using fairy lights, you want to make sure they have this plastic coating when coming out of the battery pack. I've gotten ones that are just wire coming out of here, and I've had nothing but problems with those. So make sure they have the plastic coating. Let's get started. All right, so you're going to start with 2 filler beads and a connector bead. 2 filler beads and a connector bead. And just keep following that pattern until you get to the length that you need. Normally 45 beads around is a standard size for me, but because of the battery pack, I have to make mine at least 48 beads around. You also have to remember that the battery pack is going to make a flat spot on the cuff. The bigger you make it, the less noticeable it'll be. Once you get to the length that you need, tie a knot and I'll show you what's next. All right, so here's where I tied the knot. And on this other end, you want to leave a few inches on there. Later, I'll be using that to attach the light. But you thread through the connector bead, and then it's filler bead, connector bead, filler bead. Thread into the next connector bead. Then it's filler bead, connector bead, filler bead. Thread into the next connector bead. Do this all the way around, and I'll show you the next step. All right, so this is where I started. As I came around, I threaded into this connector bead, up through this filler bead, and then out this connector bead. And then it's filler bead, connector bead, filler bead. Thread into the next connector bead on the cuff. Filler bead, connector bead, filler bead. Thread into the next connector bead on the cuff. Just continue this pattern all the way around. I'll show you what's next. I came all the way around. I threaded into this connector bead, through this filler bead, and out this connector bead. And now it's just 2 filler beads, threaded to the next connector bead. 2 filler beads, thread into the next connector bead. Just continue this all the way around, and I'll show you what's next. So as I came around, I threaded into the connector bead, and then I do 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads, thread into the next connector bead on the cuff. Then it's 2 filler beads, connector bead, 2 filler beads, thread into the next connector bead on the cuff. Do this all the way around, and I'll show you what's next. All right, so I've made the mistake of already pulling everything tight and tying a knot, so hopefully this is still easy to understand. But right here is where I started this whole row of yellow and pink. As I came back around, I threaded back into that connector bead, pulled out all the slack and tied a knot. Then I threaded up through these 2 filler beads and out this connector bead. At this point, we're going to switch over to this part of the string again and add the battery pack. All right, so these battery packs just pop open. This is where the end of the string was. As I open it up, I just run it into that little groove, out this side, and then thread it into the connector bead that is directly across, pull it tight and tie a knot. Then you have to undo the bundle of wire and get it into the hole left by the beads, not through the beads themselves, but through the gap that you've made with those X's. Then I'll show you the next. All right, so this is when the chopsticks become useful. I just put them through the cuff and an X like that. You can see where the wire came up, and you just wrap it around the cuff, keeping everything between the chopsticks and like the side of the cuff. And once I get it all done, I'll undo like 3 coils and wrap it around the wire itself. I don't know how well you can see that. You probably don't have to undo 3 coils. You could probably get away with like 4 or 5 inches of it, but that's just how much I do it. But once you have that all done, you'll be ready for the next step. All right, once you're done with the lights, we're going to go back to that piece of string that was coming out of the connector bead. And then you're just going to add on 2 filler beads, thread into the connector bead on the other side. 2 filler beads, thread into the connector bead at the pinnacle, and just keep going back and forth. Once you've gotten all the way around, be ready for the next step. All right, so as I came all the way around, I threaded into this connector bead. Now we're doing a filler bead, faceted bead, filler bead, threaded into the next connector bead. Then it's a filler bead, faceted bead, filler bead, thread it into the next connector bead. Just continue this all the way around. Then as you come to the end, you just thread back into the connector bead where you started this last step, pull everything tight and tie a knot. And then once it's all said and done, you should have something looking like this. Pretty sweet and simple. Fairy lights are super easy to work with and they're really cheap, so it's a great way to really level up your candy.